Propaganda by Edward Bernays, modernized version. Introduction: Organizing Chaos. In a democracy, there's an uncomfortable truth we need to face. Someone is shaping what the masses think and do. The people doing this shaping make up an invisible government, and this invisible government is the real power running our country. We are governed. Our minds are molded. Our tastes are shaped. Our ideas are suggested to us. And most of this is done by people we've never even heard of. This isn't some sinister conspiracy. It's just how our democratic society works. When you need millions of people to cooperate and work together, this is what happens. These invisible leaders often don't even know who else is part of the system. They lead us because they're natural leaders, because they have good ideas, and because they hold key positions in society. Here's the reality. In almost everything we do each day, whether it's politics, business, our social lives, or our moral choices, we're influenced by a very small group of people. We're talking about a tiny fraction of our population who understand how the masses think and act. These are the people pulling the strings that control public opinion. They take old social forces and create new ways to guide and control the world. Most people don't realize how necessary these invisible leaders are for society to run smoothly. In theory, every citizen can vote for whoever they want. The Constitution doesn't even mention political parties. The founders didn't imagine modern political machines. But American voters quickly learned something important. Without organization and direction, individual votes create nothing but chaos. So invisible government showed up almost overnight in the form of basic political parties. Ever since then, we've agreed that it's practical to let party systems narrow our choices down to 2, 3, or 4 candidates. In theory, every citizen makes up their own mind about public issues and private matters, but in practice, this would be impossible. If everyone had to study all the complicated economic, political, and ethical information involved in every question, they'd never reach any conclusions. So we voluntarily agreed to let an invisible government sort through all the data for us. They highlight the important issues so our choices become manageable. We accept guidance from our leaders and the media. We accept social standards from ethical teachers, whether that's a minister, a favorite writer, or just what most people think. In theory, everyone buys the best and cheapest products on the market. But in practice, imagine if everyone had to check prices and run chemical tests on every soap, fabric, and bread brand before buying. Economic life would grind to a complete halt. To avoid this mess, society agrees to have its choices narrowed down through propaganda of all kinds. There's a huge ongoing effort to capture our attention for some policy, product, or idea. It might be better if committees of wise people chose our leaders, told us how to behave, and decided what clothes we should wear and what food we should eat. But we've chosen the opposite approach. We've chosen open competition. We need to find a way to make this free competition work smoothly. To do this, society has agreed to let competition be organized through leadership and propaganda. Some parts of this process get criticized. People criticize the manipulation of news, the building up of personalities, and the general hype used to promote politicians, products, and social ideas. The tools for organizing and focusing public opinion can be misused. But this organization and focus are necessary for life to be orderly. As civilization has become more complex, the need for invisible government has become clearer. At the same time, new technical methods have been invented to shape opinion. With the printing press, newspapers, railroads, telephones, telegraphs, radio, and airplanes, ideas can now spread rapidly across America. They can even spread instantly. H.G. Wells understood the enormous potential of these inventions. He wrote in the New York Times that modern communication methods have opened up a new world of political possibilities. Print, telephone, and radio allow ideas to reach many centers of cooperation quickly. They enable fast replies and effective discussion. Wells wrote that ideas and phrases can now be more powerful than any individual person and stronger than any special interest group. A common vision can be documented and protected against being twisted or betrayed. It can be developed steadily and widely without local misunderstandings. What Wells says about politics applies equally to business, social processes, and all forms of mass activity. Today's social groups and connections aren't limited by location anymore. When the Constitution was written, the basic unit was the village community. Villages made most of what they needed and formed their opinions through direct personal contact among citizens. But today, ideas can be transmitted instantly to any distance and any number of people. This means people with the same ideas and interests can join together for common action, even if they live thousands of miles apart. It's extremely hard to grasp just how many different divisions exist in our society. These divisions may be social, political, economic, racial, religious, or ethical, with hundreds of subcategories in each. Look at the World Almanac. Just under the letter A, you'll find groups like the League to Abolish Capital Punishment, the Association to Abolish War, the American Institute of Accountants, Actors' Equity Association, the International Advertising Association, and dozens more. There are many more under just the A section of this very limited list. The 1928 American Newspaper Annual lists over 22,000 periodical publications in America. Just looking at publications starting with N that are published in Chicago, you'll find dozens, including foreign language newspapers, trade journals for specific professions, magazines for dog breeders, chiropractors, hotel chefs, meat packers, and many others. The circulation numbers for some of these publications are astonishing. The National Livestock Producer has almost 160,000 subscribers. The National Engineer has over 20,000. The New World has an estimated 67,000. Most of these periodicals, chosen randomly from among over 22,000, have circulation over 10,000. The diversity is obvious at a glance. Yet these publications only hint at the multitude of divisions that exist in our society, along which information and opinion flow with authority to individual groups. Consider the conventions scheduled for Cleveland, Ohio in a single issue of World Convention dates. Just a fraction of the 5,500 conventions and rallies scheduled that year. Photo engravers, outdoor writers, Knights of St. John, the Walther League, knitted outerwear manufacturers, mortgage bankers, employment officials, Kiwanis clubs, auto manufacturers, heating and ventilating engineers. Other conventions that year included limb manufacturers, circus fans, naturopaths, trap shooters, folklore enthusiasts, hotel greeters, fox breeders, insecticide makers, egg case manufacturers, carbonated beverage bottlers, and pickle packers, most of them with banquets and speeches attached. If all these thousands of formal organizations and institutions could be listed, and no complete list has ever been made, they'd still represent only part of the groups that exist less formally but live vigorously. Ideas are filtered and opinions are shaped in the neighborhood bridge club. Leaders assert their authority through community drives and amateur theater. Thousands of women may unconsciously belong to a group that follows fashions set by a single society leader. Life magazine expressed this idea satirically in the reply it showed. An American giving to a British person who praised America for having no upper and lower classes or castes. The American said, "Yeah, all we have is the 400. White-collar workers, bootleggers, Wall Street barons, criminals, the daughters of the American Revolution, the Ku Klux Klan, the colonial dames, the Masons, Kiwanis, and Rotarians, the Knights of Columbus, the Elks, the Censors, the Smart Set, the Morons, heroes like Lindbergh, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, politicians, intellectuals, the masses, immigrants, broadcasters, intellectuals, the masses, immigrants, broadcasters, and the rich and poor." Yet it must be remembered that these thousands of groups overlap. John Jones, besides being a Rotarian, is a member of a church, a fraternal order, a political party, a charitable organization, a professional association, a local chamber of commerce, a league for or against prohibition or the tariff, and a golf club. The opinions he receives as a Rotarian, he'll tend to spread in the other groups where he has influence. This invisible, intertwining structure of groups and associations is the mechanism by which democracy has organized its collective mind and simplified its mass thinking. To complain about the existence of such a mechanism is to ask for a society that never was and never will be. To admit it exists but expect it not to be used is unreasonable. Napoleon was always watching for signs of public opinion, always listening to the voice of the people, a voice which can't be calculated. He said, "Do you know what amazes me more than anything else? The inability of force to organize anything." This book will explain the structure of the mechanism that controls the public mind and tell how it's manipulated by those who seek to create public acceptance for a particular idea or product. It will attempt at the same time to find the proper place in modern democracy for this new propaganda and to suggest its gradually evolving code of ethics and practice. Chapter 1. The New Propaganda. In the days when kings were kings, Louis XIV made his famous remark, "I am the state." He was nearly right. But times have changed. The steam engine, the printing press, and the public school, that trio of the Industrial Revolution, took power away from kings and gave it to the people. The people actually gained the power the king lost. Economic power tends to bring political power with it. The history of the Industrial Revolution shows how that power passed from the king and the aristocracy to the middle class. Universal voting rights and universal schooling reinforced this trend. Eventually, even the middle class began to fear the common people. The masses were becoming king. Today, however, something has shifted. The minority has discovered a powerful tool for influencing majorities. It has been found possible to shape the mind of the masses so they'll use their newly gained strength in the desired direction. In our current society, this practice is inevitable. Whatever important thing gets done today, whether in politics, finance, manufacturing, agriculture, charity, or education, must be done with the help of propaganda. Propaganda is the working arm of the invisible government. Universal literacy was supposed to educate the common person to control their environment. Once people could read and write, they would have minds fit to rule. That was the democratic idea. But instead of independent minds, universal literacy has given people rubber stamps. These rubber stamps are inked with advertising slogans, with editorials, with published scientific data, with tabloid trivialities and historical cliches, but completely lacking in original thought. Each person's rubber stamps are duplicates of millions of others. When those millions are exposed to the same messages, they all receive identical impressions. It may seem like an exaggeration to say that the American public gets most of its ideas in this mass-produced fashion. The mechanism by which ideas are spread on a large scale is propaganda, in the broad sense of an organized effort to spread a particular belief or doctrine. I know that the word propaganda carries an unpleasant feeling for many people, yet whether propaganda is good or bad in any instance depends on the merit of the cause urged and the correctness of the information shared. In itself, the word propaganda has certain technical meanings which, like most things in this world, are neither good nor bad. The word was originally applied to a society of cardinals overseeing foreign missions. It was also the College of the Propaganda at Rome, founded by Pope Urban VIII in 1627 for the education of missionary priests. Later, it came to mean any institution or scheme for spreading a doctrine or system. The Scientific American recently argued for restoring this fine old word to respectable use. They pointed out that propaganda in its true sense is a perfectly legitimate form of human activity. Any society, whether social, religious, or political, which holds certain beliefs and sets out to make them known by spoken or written word, is practicing propaganda. Truth is mighty and must prevail. If any group of people believes they've discovered a valuable truth, it's not just their right, but their duty to spread that truth. If they realize that spreading the truth can only be done effectively on a large scale through organized effort, they'll use the press and the platform as the best means to give it wide circulation. propaganda becomes wrong and harmful only when its authors consciously and deliberately spread what they know to be lies, or when they aim at effects they know to be harmful to the common good. Propaganda, in its proper meaning, is a perfectly wholesome word with an honorable history. The fact that it carries a sinister meaning today merely shows how childish the average adult remains. A group of citizens writes and talks in favor of a certain course of action in some debatable question, believing it promotes the best interest of the community. Propaganda? Not at all, just a plain, forceful statement of truth. But let another group of citizens express opposing views, and they're promptly labeled with the sinister name propaganda. What's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, as the saying goes. Let's restore this fine old word to where it belongs and give it back its dignified meaning for our children and grandchildren. The extent to which propaganda shapes what happens around us may surprise even well-informed people. Nevertheless, you only need to look under the surface of the newspaper for a hint of propaganda's authority over public opinion. Page 1 of the New York Times on the day I'm writing this contains 8 important news stories. 4 of them, or one-half, are propaganda. The casual reader accepts them as accounts of spontaneous happenings. But are they? Here are the headlines. 12 nations warn China real reform must come before they give relief. Pritchett reports Zionism will fail. Realty men demand a transit inquiry. Our living standard, the highest in history, says Hoover report. Take them in order. The article on China explains the joint report of the Commission on Extraterritoriality in China, presenting the position of the world powers in the Chinese situation. What it says is less important than what it is. It was made public by the State Department with the purpose of presenting to the American public a picture of the State Department's position. Its source gives it authority, and the American public tends to accept and support the State Department view. The report of Dr. Pritchett, a trustee of the Carnegie Foundation for International Peace, is an attempt to find the facts about the Jewish colony in the midst of a restless Arab world. When Dr. Pritchett's survey convinced him that in the long run Zionism would bring more bitterness and unhappiness for both Jews and Arabs, this point of view was broadcast with all the authority of the Carnegie Foundation, so the public would hear and believe. The statement by the president of the Real Estate Board of New York and Secretary Hoover's report are similar attempts to influence public opinion. These examples aren't given to create the impression that there's anything sinister about propaganda. They're set down rather to show how conscious direction is given to events and how the people behind these events influence public opinion. As such, they're examples of modern propaganda. At this point, we can define propaganda. Modern propaganda is a consistent, enduring effort to create or shape events to influence how the public relates to an enterprise, idea, or group. This practice of creating circumstances and creating pictures in the minds of millions of people is very common. Virtually no important undertaking is carried on without it. Whether that enterprise is building a cathedral, endowing a university, marketing a movie, floating a large bond issue, or electing a president. Sometimes the effect on the public is created by a professional propagandist, sometimes by an amateur doing the job. The important thing is that it's universal and continuous. In its total, it's shaping the public mind every bit as much as an army shapes the bodies of its soldiers. So vast are the numbers of minds that can be shaped, and so firm are they when shaped, that a group sometimes offers irresistible pressure before which legislators, editors, and teachers are helpless. The group will cling to its stereotype, as Walter Lippmann calls it, making those supposedly powerful beings, the leaders of public opinion, mere driftwood in the surf. When someone sensing a hunger for an ideal offers a picture of a nation purely one ethnic group and nationalistic, the common person of older American stock, feeling elbowed out of their rightful position and prosperity by newer immigrant groups, grabs the picture that fits so neatly with their prejudices and makes it their own. They buy the costume and join with thousands of others into a huge group, powerful enough to swing state elections and throw a huge wrench into a national convention. In our present social organization, public approval is essential to any large undertaking. Hence, a worthy movement may be lost unless it impresses itself on the public mind. Charity, as well as business and politics, has had to adopt propaganda. The public must be convinced to give money just as it must be convinced about health measures. We're proud of our diminishing infant death rate, and that too is the work of propaganda. Propaganda does exist on all sides of us, and it does change our mental pictures of the world. Even if this view is overly pessimistic, and that remains to be proved, the opinion reflects a trend that's definitely real. In fact, its use is growing as its effectiveness in gaining public support is recognized. This clearly shows that anyone with sufficient influence can lead sections of the public, at least for a time and for a given purpose. In the past, the rulers were the leaders. They laid out the course of history by simply doing what they wanted. Nowadays, the successors of the rulers, those whose position or ability gives them power, can no longer do what they want without the approval of the masses. They find in propaganda a tool that's increasingly powerful in gaining that approval. Therefore, propaganda is here to stay. It was, of course, the amazing success of propaganda during the war that opened the eyes of intelligent people in all walks of life to the possibilities of shaping the public mind. The American government and numerous patriotic agencies developed a technique that, to most people seeking public acceptance, was new. They not only appealed to individuals by every means available, visual, graphic, and auditory, to support the national effort, but they also secured the cooperation of key people in every group, people whose mere word carried authority to hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers. They thus automatically gained the support of fraternal, religious, commercial, patriotic, social, and local groups whose members took their opinions from their accustomed leaders and spokesmen, or from the periodicals they were accustomed to read and believe. At the same time, those manipulating patriotic opinion used the mental shortcuts and emotional habits of the public to produce mass reactions against the alleged atrocities, terror, and tyranny of the enemy. It was only natural that after the war ended, intelligent people should ask themselves whether it was possible to apply a similar technique to the problems of peace. As a matter of fact, the practice of propaganda since the war has taken very different forms from those common 20 years ago. This new technique can fairly be called the new propaganda. It takes into account not merely the individual, nor even the mass mind alone, but also and especially the anatomy of society, with its interlocking group formations and loyalties. It sees the individual not only as a cell in the social organism, but as a cell organized into the social unit. Touch a nerve at a sensitive spot, and you get an automatic response from certain specific members of the organism. Business offers clear examples of the effect that may be produced on the public by interested groups, such as textile manufacturers losing their markets. This problem arose when the velvet manufacturers were facing ruin because their product had long been out of fashion. Analysis showed that it was impossible to revive a velvet fashion within America. The answer was Paris, obviously. But yes and no. Paris is the home of fashion. Lyons is the home of silk. The attack had to be made at the source. It was decided to substitute purpose for chance and to use the regular sources for fashion distribution to influence the public. A velvet fashion service, openly supported by the manufacturers, was organized. Its first job was to establish contact with the Lyons factories and the Paris fashion designers to discover what they were doing, to encourage them to act on behalf of velvet and to help in properly promoting their products. An intelligent Parisian was enlisted in the work. He visited Lanvin and Worth, Agnes and Patou, and others, and convinced them to use velvet in their gowns and hats. He arranged for distinguished countesses or duchesses to wear the hat or the gown. And as for presenting the idea to the public, the American buyer or the American woman of fashion was simply shown the velvet creations in the studio of the dressmaker or the milliner. She bought the velvet because she liked it and because it was in fashion. The editors of American magazines and fashion reporters of American newspapers, likewise influenced by the actual, although created, circumstance, reflected it in their news, which in turn influenced the buyer and the consumer here. The result was that what was at first a trickle of velvet became a flood. A demand was slowly but deliberately created in Paris and America. A big department store, aiming to be a style leader, advertised velvet gowns and hats on the authority of the French designers and quoted original cables received from them. The echo of the new style was heard from hundreds of department stores throughout the country which wanted to be style leaders too. The American woman traveler appeared before the ship news photographers in velvet gown and hat. The created circumstances had their effect. "Fickle fashion has turned to velvet," was one newspaper comment, and the industry in the United States again kept thousands busy. The new propaganda, taking into account society as a whole, often serves to focus and realize the desires of the masses. A desire for a specific reform, however widespread, can't be translated into action until it's made clear and forceful, and until it has put enough pressure on the proper lawmaking bodies. Millions of housewives may feel that manufactured foods harmful to health should be prohibited. But there's little chance their individual desires will be translated into effective legal form unless their half-expressed demand can be organized, made vocal, and concentrated on the state legislature or on Congress in some way that will produce the results they want. Whether they realize it or not, they call upon propaganda to organize and accomplish their demand. But clearly it's the intelligent minorities who need to make use of propaganda continuously and systematically. In the active minorities in whom selfish interests and public interests coincide lie the progress and development of America. Only through the active energy of the intelligent few can the public at large become aware of and act upon new ideas. Small groups of people can, and do, make the rest of us think what they please about a given subject. But there are usually supporters and opponents of every propaganda, both equally eager to convince the majority. Chapter 2. The New Propagandists. Who are the people who, without us realizing it, give us our ideas, who tell us whom to admire and whom to despise, who tell us what to believe about public utilities, about the tariff, about immigration, who tell us how our houses should be designed, what furniture to put in them, what meals to serve, what kind of shirts we must wear, what sports we should enjoy, what plays we should see, what charities we should support, what pictures we should admire, what slang we should use, what jokes we should laugh at. If we tried to make a list of the people who, because of their position in public life, might fairly be called the molders of public opinion, we could quickly come up with an extended list. It would obviously include the President of the United States and cabinet members, senators and representatives, state governors, presidents of chambers of commerce in our 100 largest cities, chairmen of boards of our largest industrial corporations, presidents of many labor unions, national presidents of professional and fraternal organizations, presidents of racial or language societies, leading newspaper and magazine editors, the most popular authors, presidents of leading charitable organizations, leading theatrical or cinema producers, recognized fashion leaders, the most popular and influential clergy in major cities, colleges. Such a list would have several thousand people. But it's well known that many of these leaders are themselves led, sometimes by people whose names are known to few. Many a congressman, in framing his platform, follows the suggestions of a district boss whom few people outside the political machine have ever heard of. Eloquent ministers may have great influence in their communities, but often take their doctrines from a higher church authority. The presidents of chambers of commerce mold the thought of local business leaders concerning public issues, but the opinions they spread are usually derived from some national authority. A presidential candidate may be drafted in response to overwhelming popular demand, but it's well known that his name may be decided upon by half a dozen people sitting around a table in a hotel room. In some cases, the power of invisible wire pullers is obvious. The power of the invisible cabinet which met at the poker table in a certain little green house in Washington has become a national legend. There was a period in which the major policies of the national government were dictated by a single man, Mark Hanna. Such people represent in the public mind the type of ruler associated with the phrase invisible government. But we don't often stop to think that there are dictators in other fields whose influence is just as decisive as that of the politicians I've mentioned. A fashion leader like Irene Castle can establish the style of short hair which dominates 9/10 of the women who make any claim to being fashionable. Paris fashion leaders set the style of the short skirt, for wearing which 20 years ago any woman would simply have been arrested and thrown in jail by the New York police. The entire women's clothing industry, worth hundreds of millions of dollars, must be reorganized to conform to their decision. There are invisible rulers who control the destinies of millions. It's not generally realized to what extent the words and actions of our most influential public figures are dictated by shrewd people operating behind the scenes, nor, what's even more important, the extent to which our thoughts and habits are modified by these authorities. In some parts of our daily life where we imagine ourselves free agents, we are ruled by dictators exercising great power. A man buying a suit of clothes imagines he's choosing, according to his taste and personality, the kind of garment he prefers. In reality, he may be obeying the orders of an anonymous gentleman tailor in London. This person is the silent partner in a modest tailoring establishment patronized by gentlemen of fashion and royalty. He suggests to British noblemen and others a blue cloth instead of gray, 2 buttons instead of 3, or sleeves a 1/4 of an inch narrower than last season. The distinguished customer approves the idea. But how does this fact affect John Smith of Topeka? The gentleman tailor is under contract with a certain large American firm that manufactures men's suits to send them instantly the designs of the suits chosen by the leaders of London fashion. Upon receiving the designs, with specifications as to color, weight, and texture, the firm immediately places an order with the cloth makers for several $100,000 worth of cloth. The suits made up according to the specifications are then advertised as the latest fashion. The fashionable men in New York, Chicago, Boston, and Philadelphia wear them, and the Topeka man, recognizing this leadership, does the same. Women are just as subject to the commands of invisible government as men are. A silk manufacturer seeking a new market for its product suggested to a large shoe manufacturer that women's shoes should be covered with silk to match their dresses. The idea was adopted and systematically spread. A popular actress was persuaded to wear the shoes. The fashion spread. The shoe firm was ready with the supply to meet the created demand. And the silk company was ready with the silk for more shoes. The person who injected this idea into the shoe industry was ruling women in one part of their social lives. Different people rule us in the various parts of our lives. There may be one power behind the throne in politics, another in the manipulation of interest rates, and still another in deciding next season's dances. If there were a national, invisible cabinet ruling our destinies, a thing which isn't impossible to imagine, it would work through certain group leaders on Tuesday for one purpose, and through an entirely different set on Wednesday for another. The idea of invisible government is relative. There may be a handful of people who control the educational methods of the great majority of our schools. Yet, from another standpoint, every parent is a group leader with authority over their children. The invisible government tends to be concentrated in the hands of the few because of the expense of manipulating the social machinery which controls the opinions and habits of the masses. To advertise on a scale which will reach 50 million people is expensive. To reach and persuade the group leaders who dictate the public's thoughts and actions is likewise expensive. For this reason, there's an increasing tendency to concentrate the functions of propaganda in the hands of the propaganda specialist. This specialist is more and more taking on a distinct place and function in our national life. New activities call for new names. The propagandist who specializes in interpreting enterprises and ideas to the public and in interpreting the public to those promoting new enterprises and ideas has come to be known by the name of public relations counsel. The new profession of public relations has grown up because of the increasing complexity of modern life and the resulting necessity for making the actions of one part of the public understandable to other sectors of the public. It's also due to the increasing dependence of organized power of all sorts upon public opinion. Governments, whether they're monarchies, constitutional governments, democracies, or communist states, depend upon favorable public opinion for the success of their efforts. In fact, government is only government by virtue of public consent. Industries, public utilities, educational movements, indeed all groups representing any concept or product, whether they're majority or minority ideas, succeed only because of approving public opinion. Public opinion is the unacknowledged partner in all broad efforts. The Public Relations Council, then, is the agent who, working with modern media of communication and the group formations of society, brings an idea to the consciousness of the public. But he's a great deal more than that. He's concerned with courses of action, doctrines, systems, and opinions, and securing public support for them. He's also concerned with tangible things such as manufactured and raw products. He's concerned with public utilities, with large trade groups and associations representing entire industries. He functions primarily as an advisor to his client, very much as a lawyer does. A lawyer concentrates on the legal aspects of his client's business. A public relations counsel concentrates on the public contacts of his client's business. Every phase of his client's ideas, products, or activities which may affect the public or in which the public may have an interest is part of his function. For instance, in the specific problems of a manufacturer, he examines the product, the markets, the way the public reacts to the product, the attitude of the employees toward the public and toward the product, and the cooperation of the distribution agencies. The Public Relations Council, after examining all these and other factors, works to shape the actions of his client so they'll gain the interest, approval, and acceptance of the public. The means by which the public is informed of the actions of his client are as varied as the means of communication themselves: conversation, letters, the stage, motion pictures, radio, lectures, magazines, daily newspapers. The Public Relations Council is not an advertising agent, but he may recommend advertising where appropriate. Very often, he's called in by an advertising agency to supplement its work on behalf of a client. His work and that of the advertising agency don't conflict or duplicate each other. His first efforts are naturally devoted to analyzing his client's problems and making sure that what the client has to offer the public is something the public accepts or can be brought to accept. It's futile to attempt to sell an idea or prepare the ground for a product that's fundamentally unsound. For example, an orphanage is worried by a drop in contributions and a puzzling attitude of indifference or hostility from the public. The Public Relations Council may discover upon analysis that the public, aware of modern sociological trends, subconsciously criticizes the institution because it's not organized on the new cottage plan. He'll advise modification of the client in this respect. Or a railroad may be urged to put on a fast train for the sake of the prestige it will lend to the road's name and hence to its stocks and bonds. If the corset makers, for instance, wished to bring their product back into fashion, he would definitely advise that the plan was impossible, since women have definitely freed themselves from the old-style corset. Yet his fashion advisors might report that women might be persuaded to adopt a certain type of girdle which eliminated the unhealthy features of the corset. His next effort is to analyze his public. He studies the groups which must be reached and the leaders through whom he may approach these groups. Social groups, economic groups, geographical groups, age groups, doctrinal groups, language groups, cultural groups, all these represent the divisions through which, on behalf of his client, he may talk to the public. Only after this double analysis has been made and the results combined has the time come for the next step: the formulation of policies governing the general practice, procedure, and habits of the client in all those ways in which the client comes in contact with the public. And only when these policies have been agreed upon is it time for the fourth step: the first recognition of the distinct functions of the Public Relations Council arose, perhaps, in the early years of the present century as a result of the insurance scandals coincident with the exposing of corporate finance in the popular magazines. The interests thus attacked suddenly realized they were completely out of touch with the public they were claiming to serve and required expert advice to show them how they could understand the public and interpret themselves to it. The Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, prompted by fundamental self-interest, initiated a conscious, directed effort to change the attitude of the public toward insurance companies in general, and toward itself in particular, to its profit and the public's benefit. It tried to make itself part of a majority movement by getting the public to buy its policies. It reached the public at every point of its corporate and separate existence. To communities, it gave health surveys and expert counsel. To individuals, it gave health advice. Even the building in which the corporation was located was made a picturesque landmark to see and remember, in other words, to carry on the associative process. And so this company came to have broad general acceptance. The number and amount of its policies grew constantly as its broad contacts with society increased. Within a decade, many large corporations were employing public relations counsel under one title or another, for they had come to recognize that they depended upon public goodwill for their continued prosperity. It was no longer true that it was none of the public's business how the affairs of a corporation were managed. They were obliged to convince the public that they were conforming to its demands regarding honesty and fairness. Thus, a corporation might discover that its labor policy was causing public resentment and might introduce a more enlightened policy solely for the sake of general goodwill. Or a department store, searching for the cause of diminishing sales, might discover that its clerks had a reputation for bad manners and initiate formal instruction in courtesy and tact. The public relations expert may be known as public relations director or counsel. Often he's called secretary or vice president or director. Sometimes he's known as cabinet officer or commissioner. By whatever title he's called, his function is well defined, and his advice has definite bearing on the conduct of the group or individual with whom he's working. Many people still believe that the public relations counsel is a propagandist and nothing else. But on the contrary, the stage at which many suppose he starts his activities may actually be the stage at which he ends them. After the public and the client are thoroughly analyzed and policies have been formulated, his work may be finished. In other cases, the work of the public relations counsel must be continuous to be effective, for in many instances, only by a careful system of constant, thorough, and frank information will the public understand and appreciate the value of what a merchant, educator, or statesman is doing. The public relations counsel must maintain constant watchfulness because inadequate information or false information from unknown sources may have results of enormous importance. A single false rumor at a critical moment may drive down the price of a corporation's stock, causing a loss of millions to stockholders. An air of secrecy or mystery about a corporation's financial dealings may breed a general suspicion capable of acting as an invisible drag on the company's whole dealings with the public. The public relations counsel must be in a position to deal effectively with rumors and suspicions, attempting to stop them at their source, counteracting them promptly with correct or more complete information through channels which will be most effective, or best of all, establishing such relations of confidence in the concern's integrity that rumors and suspicions will have no opportunity to take root. His function may include the discovery of new markets whose existence had been unsuspected. If we accept public relations as a profession, we must also expect it to have both ideals and ethics. The ideal of the profession is practical. It's to make the producer, whether that producer is a legislature making laws or a manufacturer making a commercial product, understand what the public wants, and to make the public understand the objectives of the producer. In relation to industry, the ideal of the profession is to eliminate the waste and friction that result when industry does things or makes things which its public doesn't want, or when the public doesn't understand what's being offered it. For example, the telephone companies maintain extensive public relations departments to explain what they're doing so that energy isn't burned up in the friction of misunderstanding. A detailed description, for example, of the immense and scientific care which the company takes to choose clearly understandable and distinguishable exchange names helps the public appreciate the effort being made to give good service and stimulates it to cooperate by speaking clearly. It aims to bring about understanding between educators and students, between government and people, between charitable institutions and contributors, between nation and nation. The profession of public relations counsel is developing for itself an ethical code which compares favorably with that governing the legal and medical professions. In part, this code is forced upon the public relations counsel by the very conditions of his work. While recognizing, just as the lawyer does, that everyone has the right to present his case in its best light, he nevertheless refuses a client he believes to be dishonest, a product he believes to be fraudulent, or a cause he believes to be harmful to society. One reason for this is that even though he's a special pleader, he's not separated from the client in the public's mind. Another reason is that while he's pleading before the court of public opinion, he's at the same time trying to affect that court's judgments and actions. In law, the judge and jury hold the deciding balance of power. In public opinion, the public relations counsel is judge and jury, because through his pleading of a case, the public may accept his opinion and judgment. He doesn't accept a client whose interests conflict with those of another client. He doesn't accept a client whose case he believes to be hopeless or whose product he believes to be unmarketable. He should be honest in his dealings. It must be repeated that his business is not to fool or deceive the public. If he were to get such a reputation, his usefulness in his profession would be at an end. When he's sending out material, it's clearly labeled as to source. The editor knows from whom it comes and what its purpose is, and accepts or rejects it on its merits as news. Simplified. Chapters for audio. Book. Narration. Chapter 3. The Psychology of Public Relations. When researchers began studying how groups of people think and behave, they discovered something remarkable. Groups don't think the same way individuals do. Scholars like Trotter, Laban, Graham Wallace, and Walter Lippmann showed us that crowds operate on impulses and emotions that can't be explained by individual psychology alone. This raised an important question. If we understand how group psychology works, can we influence and guide large numbers of people without them realizing it? The practice of propaganda has proven that yes, we can do this, at least to some degree. Mass psychology isn't an exact science yet. We haven't unlocked all the mysteries of human motivation. But theory and practice have shown us enough to know that we can sometimes shift public opinion with reasonable accuracy by using certain methods. It's like a driver controlling a car's speed by adjusting the gas pedal. Propaganda isn't the laboratory science, but it's no longer just guesswork either. It's scientific in the sense that it bases its work on direct observation of group behavior and applies principles that have proven to be fairly consistent. Modern propagandists approach their work methodically, like scientists in a lab. If they're running a nationwide sales campaign, they study their target audience carefully. They might use a news clipping service, send out scouts, or personally investigate key locations. For example, they'll figure out which features of a product are losing appeal and where public taste is heading next. They won't overlook details like whether wives actually make the final decision about their husband's car, suits, or shirts. Of course, we can't expect perfect scientific accuracy. Too many factors remain beyond anyone's control. A propagandist might predict with good confidence that an international flight will generate goodwill and support certain political programs. But they can't guarantee that some unexpected event won't overshadow the flight, or that another pilot won't do something more spectacular the day before. Even in the specialized field of public psychology, there will always be a margin for error. Propaganda, like economics and sociology, can never be an exact science because it deals with human beings. Here's a key principle. If you can influence leaders, either with or without their knowledge, you automatically influence the groups that follow them. And people don't need to be physically gathered in a meeting or a street riot to be affected by mass psychology. Because humans are naturally social creatures, each person feels like part of the herd even when sitting alone in their room with the curtains drawn. Their mind carries patterns stamped on it by group influences. Think about a man in his office deciding which stocks to buy. He probably believes he's using his own independent judgment. In reality, his thinking is shaped by countless outside influences that unconsciously control his thoughts. He buys a particular railroad stock because it made headlines yesterday and therefore comes to mind most easily. Because he remembers a pleasant dinner on one of its express trains. Because the company has a reputation for fair labor practices and honesty. Because someone told him that a prominent investor owns shares. Trotter and Laban concluded that groups don't really think in the strict sense of the word. Instead of thoughts, groups have impulses, habits, and emotions. When making decisions, their first instinct is usually to follow the example of a trusted leader. This is one of the most solid principles of mass psychology. It's what creates or destroys the reputation of a summer resort, causes runs on banks or stock market panics, produces bestsellers, and creates box office hits. But when the example of a leader isn't available and the herd must think for itself, it does so using cliches. These are pat words or images that represent whole groups of ideas or experiences. Not many years ago, you only needed to label a political candidate with the word interests to make millions vote against them. Anything associated with the interests seemed automatically corrupt. More recently, the word Bolshevik has served a similar purpose for those wanting to frighten the public away from certain actions. By manipulating an old cliché or creating a new one, propagandists can sometimes shift a whole mass of group emotions. During World War I in Great Britain, evacuation hospitals received considerable criticism for how they handled wounded soldiers. The public expected hospitals to provide prolonged, careful attention to patients. When officials changed the name to evacuation posts, the criticism vanished. No one expected more than adequate emergency treatment from a facility called a post. The cliché hospital was permanently linked in the public mind with a certain image. Rather than trying to change that association, which would have been impossible, they simply introduced a new cliché that automatically shaped public feelings. People are rarely aware of their real motivations. A man might believe he bought a particular car after carefully studying the technical features of all available models and concluding this one is best. He's almost certainly fooling himself. He bought it perhaps because a friend whose business judgment he respects bought one last week, or because his neighbors doubted he could afford a car in that class, or because its colors match his college fraternity. It's primarily psychologists from the Freudian school who have pointed out that many human thoughts and actions are substitutes for desires we've been forced to suppress. We might desire something not for its actual worth or usefulness, but because we've unconsciously come to see it as a symbol of something else, something we're ashamed to admit we want. A man buying a car may think he needs it for transportation, when in fact he'd rather not be burdened with it and would prefer walking for his health. He might really want it because it's a symbol of social status, evidence of business success, or a way to please his wife. This general principle applies to mass psychology as much as individual psychology. People are largely motivated by desires they hide from themselves. Any successful propagandist must understand true motives and not accept the surface reasons people give for their actions. Understanding the mechanical structure of society isn't enough. You need to know about groupings, divisions, and loyalties. But an engineer might know everything about a locomotive's cylinders and pistons, yet still can't make it run without understanding how steam behaves under pressure. Human desires are the steam that makes the social machine work. Only by understanding them can propagandists control that vast, loosely connected mechanism we call modern society. Old-style propagandists based their work on the mechanical psychology that was popular in colleges at the time. This approach claimed the human mind was simply a machine, a system of nerves and nerve centers that responded mechanically to stimuli, like a helpless, will-less robot. The propagandist's job was to provide the stimulus that would trigger the desired reaction in the individual customer. This old psychology taught that repeating a stimulus enough times would create a habit, or that simply repeating an idea over and over would create a conviction. Imagine an old-fashioned salesman working for a meat packer trying to increase bacon sales. They would repeat endlessly in full-page advertisements, "Eat more bacon. Eat bacon because it's cheap, because it's good, because it gives you energy. The new psychology treats people quite differently. It doesn't try to convince everyone separately. Instead, it studies group structures, group customs, and group emotions, then uses group leaders to influence the entire group. Here's a concrete example. To emphasize that Jackson Heights was a socially desirable place to live, every effort was made to create positive associations. A benefit performance was staged for earthquake victims in Japan, with prominent socialites as sponsors. The social advantages were highlighted through a golf course and clubhouse. When the post office opened, public relations advisors discovered the opening date coincided with an important date in Postal Service history. This became the focus of the opening ceremony. To showcase the beauty of the apartments, a competition was held among interior decorators for the best furnished apartment in Jackson Heights. An important committee of judges made the decision. This competition gained approval from well-known authorities and interest from millions who learned about it through newspaper and magazine coverage, building up the development's prestige. One of the most effective methods is using modern society's group structure to spread ideas. An example is the nationwide sculpture competitions in ivory soap, open to school children and professional sculptors. A nationally recognized sculptor discovered that ivory soap was an excellent medium for sculpture. The company offered prizes for the best sculptures in white soap. The Art Center in New York City, an organization with high standing in the art world, sponsored the contest. School administrators and teachers across the country welcomed this as an educational tool for schools. School children practiced as part of their art courses. Competitions were held between schools, between school districts, and between cities. Ivory soap worked well for home sculpting because mothers saved the shavings and imperfect attempts for laundry. The work itself was clean. The best pieces from local competitions entered the national contest held annually at an important New York art gallery. The gallery's prestige, along with distinguished judges, established the contest as a serious art event. In the first national competition, about 500 sculptures were entered. In the third, 2,500. In the fourth, more than 4,000. If that many carefully selected pieces were entered, clearly a vast number were sculpted during the year, and even more must have been made for practice. The goodwill was greatly enhanced because this soap had become not just the housewife's concern, but also a matter of personal interest to her children. Several familiar psychological motives were activated in this campaign. The aesthetic impulse, the competitive drive, the gregarious instinct. Much sculpting was done in school groups, the desire to follow recognized leaders, the exhibitionist impulse, and, certainly not least, the maternal instinct. All these motives and group habits were set in motion through the simple machinery of group leadership and authority. As if someone pressed a button, people began working for the client, simply for the gratification obtained from the sculpture work itself. This point is crucial in successful propaganda work. Leaders who lend their authority to any propaganda campaign will do so only if it touches their own interests. There must be a genuine aspect to the propagandist's activities. In other words, one function of the public relations advisor is discovering where their client's interests overlap with those of other individuals or groups. In the soap sculpture competition, the distinguished artists and educators who sponsored the idea were glad to lend their services and names because the competitions genuinely promoted an interest close to their hearts, cultivating aesthetic appreciation among young people. Such overlapping of interests is as infinite as the interlacing of social groups themselves. For example, a railway wants to develop its business. The public relations advisor surveys where the railway's interests align with those of prospective customers. The company then establishes relationships with chambers of commerce along its route and helps them develop their communities. It helps secure new plants and industries for towns. It facilitates business through technical information sharing. This isn't merely hoping that favors will be returned. These railway activities, besides creating goodwill, actually promote growth along its route. The interests of the railway and the communities it serves interact and strengthen each other. Similarly, a bank creates an investment service for customers so they'll have more money to deposit. A jewelry store develops an insurance department for the jewels it sells to give purchasers greater security. A baking company establishes an information service with bread recipes to encourage new uses for bread in the home. The ideas of new propaganda are based on sound psychology rooted in enlightened self-interest. I've tried in these chapters to explain propaganda's place in modern American life and something of how it operates. I've covered the why, the what, the who, and the how of the invisible government that influences our thoughts, directs our feelings, and controls our actions. In the following chapters, I'll show how propaganda functions in specific areas of group activity and suggest additional ways it may operate. Chapter 4. Buzzins and the Public. The relationship between business and the public has grown much closer in recent decades. Business today is taking the public into partnership. Several causes have created this situation, some economic, others stemming from growing public understanding of business and increasing public interest in business affairs. Business now realizes that its relationship to the public isn't limited to manufacturing and selling a product. It also includes selling itself and everything it represents in the public mind. 20 or 25 years ago, business tried to run its own affairs regardless of public opinion. The result was the muckraking period, when numerous sins were laid at the feet of big business, both fairly and unfairly. Faced with an aroused public conscience, large corporations were forced to abandon their claim that their affairs were nobody's business. If big business today tried to ignore the public, a similar reaction would occur, and the public would try to restrain big business with restrictive laws. Business is now conscious of the public's moral standards. This awareness has led to healthy cooperation. Another reason for this increasing relationship lies in various phenomena growing from mass production. Mass production is only profitable if its rhythm can be maintained. That is, if it can continue selling its product in steady or increasing quantities. The result is that, while under the handicraft or small unit production system typical a century ago, demand created supply, today's supply must actively work to create corresponding demand. A single factory potentially capable of supplying an entire continent with its product can't afford to wait until the public asks for it. It must maintain constant contact through advertising and propaganda with the vast public to ensure the continuous demand that alone makes its costly plant profitable. This requires a vastly more complex distribution system than before. Creating customers is the new problem. You must understand not only your own business, the manufacture of a particular product, but also the structure, personality, and preferences of a potentially universal public. Yet another reason lies in improvements in advertising technique, both in the size of the public that can be reached through print and in methods of appeal. The growth of newspapers and magazines with circulations in the millions, and the art of modern advertising in making printed messages attractive and persuasive, have placed business owners in personal contact with a vast and diverse public. Another modern phenomenon influencing big business policy is new competition between certain firms and the rest of their industry. Another kind exists between whole industries competing for the consumer's dollar. When, for example, a soap manufacturer claims their product will preserve youth, they're obviously trying to change how the public thinks about soap in general, something of great importance to the whole industry. Or when the metal furniture industry tries to convince the public it's more desirable to spend money on metal furniture than wood furniture, it's clearly seeking to change the taste and standards of an entire generation. In either case, business is trying to inject itself into the lives and customs of millions of people. Even fundamentally, business is becoming dependent on public opinion. With increasing volume and wider distribution of wealth in America, thousands now invest in industrial stocks. New stock or bond issues, on which expanding businesses depend for success, can only succeed if the company has gained the confidence and goodwill of the general public. Business must express itself and its entire corporate existence so the public will understand and accept it. It must dramatize its personality and interpret its objectives in every way it contacts the community or nation of which it's a part. An oil corporation that truly understands its many-sided public relationship will offer not only good oil but also a sound labor policy. A bank will try to show not only that its management is sound and conservative, but also that its officers are honorable in both public and private life. A store specializing in fashionable men's clothing will express through its architecture the authenticity of the goods it offers. A bakery will try to impress the public with the hygienic care in its manufacturing process, not only by wrapping loaves in dust-proof paper and opening its factory to public inspection, but also through clean and attractive delivery vehicles. A construction firm will ensure the public knows not only that its buildings are durable and safe, but also that injured employees are compensated. At whatever point a business enterprise touches public consciousness, it must give its public relations the particular character that conforms to its objectives. Just as a production manager must be familiar with every element and detail of their working materials, the person in charge of a firm's public relations must be familiar with the structure, preferences, and habits of the general public, handling problems with utmost care. The public has its own standards, demands, and habits. You may modify them, but you dare not oppose them. You can't persuade an entire generation of women to wear long skirts, but by working through fashion leaders, you might persuade them to wear evening dresses that are long in back. The public isn't a shapeless mass that can be molded at will or dictated to. Both business and the public have their own personalities that must somehow be brought into friendly agreement. Conflict and suspicion harm both. Modern business must study how this partnership can be made agreeable and mutually beneficial. It must explain itself, its aims, and its objectives to the public in terms the public can understand and accept. Business doesn't willingly accept public dictation. It shouldn't expect to dictate to the public either. While the public should appreciate the great economic benefits business offers through mass production and scientific marketing, business should also appreciate that the public is becoming increasingly selective in its standards and should work to understand and meet public demands. The relationship between business and the public can only be healthy if it's a relationship of give and take. This condition and necessity has created the need for a specialized field of public relations. Business now calls in public relations advisors to help interpret its purpose to the public and suggest modifications that may help it conform to public demand. The recommended modifications to make business conform to its objectives and public demand may concern the broadest policy matters or the most seemingly trivial execution details. In one case, it might be necessary to completely transform product lines to match changing public demands. In another case, the problem might lie in something as small as clerk uniforms. A jewelry store might complain that its customer base is shrinking upward because of its reputation for high-priced goods. In this case, public relations advisors might suggest featuring medium-priced goods, even at a loss. Not because the firm wants a large medium-priced customer base as such, but because some percentage of those 100 medium-priced customers acquired today will be well-to-do in 10 years. A department store seeking high-class customers might be urged to employ college graduates as clerks or engage well-known modern artists to design window displays or special exhibits. A bank might be urged to open a prestigious avenue branch, not because the actual business there warrants the expense, but because a beautiful office correctly expresses the appeal it wishes to make to future depositors. Viewed this way, it may be as important that the doorman be polite or the floors kept clean as that the branch manager be an able financier. Yet the beneficial effect of this branch may be canceled if the president's wife is involved in a scandal. Big business studies every action that may express its true personality. It seeks to tell the public, in all appropriate ways through direct advertising and subtle aesthetic suggestion, the quality of goods or services it offers. A store seeking large sales volume and cheap goods will emphasize prices constantly, concentrating its entire appeal on how it can save customers money. But a store seeking high profit margins on individual sales would try to associate itself with distinction and elegance, whether through an exhibition of old masters or the social activities of the owner's wife. A business's public relations activities can't be protective, coloring to hide its real aims. It's bad business as well as bad ethics to feature exclusively a few high-class items when the main stock is medium grade or cheap, because the general impression given is false. Sound public relations policy won't try to stampede the public with exaggerated claims and false pretenses, but will interpret the individual business vividly and truthfully through every avenue leading to public opinion. The New York Central Railroad has for decades appealed to the public not only on the basis of speed and safety, but also elegance and comfort. It was appropriate that the corporation was personified to the general public through so smooth and engaging a gentleman, ideal window dressing for such an enterprise. While concrete recommendations from public relations advisors may vary infinitely according to circumstances, their general work plan can be reduced to two types: continuous interpretation and dramatization through highlighting. The two may be alternatives or pursued simultaneously. Continuous interpretation means creating steady contact between business and public through all available channels. For a railroad, this might mean regular updates on service improvements, safety records, and community contributions. For a manufacturer, it might mean ongoing communication about product quality, innovation, and corporate responsibility. Dramatization through highlighting means creating or seizing specific events that capture public attention and advance the business's message. An example of this occurred when leading fashion authorities decided to change hat styles. Rather than gradually introducing the change, they created a dramatic event. A fashion show was staged where models wore the new, larger, more elaborately trimmed hats. The event attracted society leaders, fashion buyers, and extensive media coverage. The news of this event affected buying habits not only of attendees, but of women throughout the country. The story was communicated to consumers through newspapers and favorite store advertisements. Manufacturers sent announcements to millinery buyers. One manufacturer stated that before the show they had sold no large trimmed hats, but afterwards sold thousands. Often, public relations advisors are called to handle emergencies. A false rumor, for instance, may cause enormous loss in prestige and money if not handled promptly and effectively. An incident shows what lack of proper public relations handling might result in. Hudson Motor Company stock fluctuated widely one day, and losses estimated at $500,000 to $1 million were suffered as a result of false news about dividend action spreading widely. The directors met to act on a dividend. Almost immediately, a false report that only the regular dividend had been declared circulated. The stock dropped. Shortly after, correct news was received that the dividend had been increased and a stock distribution authorized. The stock immediately jumped more than 6 points. Here's an interesting example of a method to counteract a false rumor. When the president of a packing company publicly denied rumors that he was selling his company for $17 million, which would have meant moving the industry from its birthplace, he did so in terms conspicuously loyal to his hometown, which he had built into a prosperous industrial community through 30 years of management. He absolutely controlled the business and flatly stated he would never sell it during his lifetime to anyone at any price, since it would be disloyal to his friends and fellow workers. The whole region spontaneously decided such spirit deserved public recognition. More than 3,000 people participated in festivities honoring him. Of course, everyone realized after this there was no truth in the rumor. A simple denial wouldn't have carried as much conviction. Entertainment is also a business, one of America's largest. The entertainment business, first circus and medicine show, then theater, taught the basics of advertising to industry and commerce. Business adopted the showmanship of entertainment. But under practical experience, business adapted and refined these crude advertising methods to achieve precise ends. Theater has, in turn, learned from business and refined its publicity methods to where old loud methods are discarded. The modern publicity director of a theater syndicate or motion picture company is a business person responsible for the security of tens or hundreds of millions of dollars in invested capital. They can't afford to be a stunt artist or freelance publicity adventurer. They must know their public accurately and modify its thoughts and actions using methods the entertainment world learned from its former student, big business. As public knowledge increases and public taste improves, business must be ready to meet them halfway. Modern business must continuously keep its finger on the public pulse. It must understand changes in the public mind and be prepared to interpret itself fairly and eloquently to changing opinion. Chapter 5. Propaganda and Political Leadership. The great political problem in modern democracy is how to motivate our leaders to actually lead. The idea that the voice of the people is the voice of God tends to make elected officials into helpless servants of their constituents. This is partly why certain American critics constantly complain about political stagnation. No serious sociologist any longer believes that the voice of the people expresses any divinely inspired or especially wise and noble idea. The voice of the people expresses the collective mind, and that mind is shaped for it by the group leaders it trusts and by those who understand how to manipulate public opinion. It's composed of inherited prejudices, symbols, cliches, and verbal formulas supplied by leaders. Fortunately, sincere and talented politicians can use propaganda as an instrument to shape and form the will of the people. Benjamin Disraeli cynically expressed this dilemma when he said, "I must follow the people. Am I not their leader?" He might have added, "I must lead the people. Am I not their servant?" Unfortunately, the methods contemporary politicians use in dealing with the public are as outdated and ineffective as business advertising methods from 1900 would be today. While politics was the first important area of American life to use propaganda on a large scale, it has been the slowest to modify its propaganda methods to meet the changed conditions of the public mind. American business first learned from politics the methods of appealing to the broad public. But business continually improved those methods through competitive struggle, while politics clung to old formulas. The political apathy of the average voter, which we hear so much about, is undoubtedly because politicians don't know how to meet the conditions of the public mind. They can't dramatize themselves and their platforms in terms that have real meaning to the public. Acting on the false belief that leaders must slavishly follow, they deprive their campaigns of all dramatic interest. An automaton can't arouse public interest. A leader, a fighter, someone decisive can. But given our present political conditions where every office seeker must appeal to mass votes, the only means by which natural leaders can lead is through expert use of propaganda. Whether in the problem of getting elected, interpreting and popularizing new issues, or making daily administration of public affairs a vital part of community life, the use of propaganda carefully adjusted to the mentality of the masses is an essential part of political life. The successful business person today imitates the politician. They've adopted the glitter and fanfare of campaigns. They've set up all the sideshows. They hold annual dinners that are compilations of speeches, flags, bombast, formality, and pseudo-democracy slightly tinged with paternalism. Occasionally, they hand out honors to employees, much as ancient republics rewarded worthy citizens. But these are merely the sideshows, the drumbeating of big business, by which it builds an image of public service and honorary service. This is just one method by which business stimulates loyal enthusiasm among directors, workers, stockholders, and the consumer public. It's one way big business performs its function of making and selling products to the public. The real work and campaign of business consists of intensive study of the public, manufacturing products based on this study, and exhaustive use of every means of reaching the public. Political campaigns today are all sideshows, all honors, all bombast, glitter, and speeches. These are for the most part unrelated to the main business of studying the public scientifically, supplying the public with party, candidate, platform, and performance, and selling these ideas and products to the public. Politics was the first big business in America. Therefore, there's considerable irony in the fact that business has learned everything politics had to teach, but politics has failed to learn much from business methods of mass distribution of ideas and products. A political organizer once recounted a typical instance of wasted effort and money in a political campaign, a week-long speaking tour she participated in. She estimated that on a 5-day trip covering nearly 1,000 miles, she and a United States senator addressed no more than 1,100 people whose votes might conceivably have been changed as a result of their efforts. The cost of this appeal to these voters, she calculated, valuing the time spent on a very moderate basis, as over $15 for each vote that might have been changed. This, she said, was a drive for votes, just as a soap advertising campaign is a drive for sales. But, she asked, what would a company executive say to a sales manager who sent a high-priced speaker to describe their product to fewer than 1,200 people at a cost of over $15 for each possible buyer? She found it amazing that the very people who make millions from cleverly devised drives for soap, bonds, and cars will turn around and give large contributions to be spent for vote-getting in an utterly inefficient and outdated fashion. It's indeed incomprehensible that politicians don't use the elaborate business methods that industry has built up. Just because a politician knows political strategy, can develop campaign issues, can devise strong platform planks and envision broad policies, doesn't mean they can be given responsibility for selling ideas to a public as large as that of the United States. Politicians understand the public. They know what the public wants and what it will accept. But politicians aren't necessarily general sales managers, public relations advisors, or people who know how to secure mass distribution of ideas. Obviously, an occasional political leader may be capable of combining every feature of leadership. Just as in business, there are certain brilliant industrial leaders who are financiers, factory directors, engineers, sales managers, and public relations advisors all in one. Some critics object that propaganda will defeat itself as its mechanisms become obvious to the public. My opinion is that it won't. The only propaganda that will ever weaken itself as the world becomes more sophisticated and intelligent is propaganda that's untrue or harmful to society. Again, the objection is raised that if propaganda creates our leading political personalities, whether the leader makes propaganda or propaganda makes the leader becomes questionable. There's a widespread impression that a good press agent can inflate a nobody into a great person. The answer is the same as for the old question about whether newspapers make public opinion or public opinion makes newspapers. There has to be fertile ground for the leader and the idea to land on, but the leader also has to have some vital message to plant. To use another figure, a mutual need must exist before either can become positively effective. Propaganda is useless to politicians unless they have something to say that the public, consciously or unconsciously, wants to hear. But even supposing certain propaganda is untrue or dishonest, we can't reject propaganda methods on that account. Propaganda in some form will always be used where leaders need to appeal to their constituencies. The criticism is often made that propaganda tends to make the President of the United States so important that they become not just president, but the embodiment of hero worship, if not deity worship. I quite agree this is so, but how can you stop a condition that accurately reflects the desires of part of the public? The American people rightly sense the enormous importance of the executive office. If the public tends to make the president a heroic symbol of that power, that isn't propaganda's fault but lies in the very nature of the office and its relationship to the people. This condition, despite its somewhat irrational inflation of the person to fit the office, is perhaps still sounder than a condition where the person uses no propaganda or propaganda not adapted to its proper purpose. Note the example of a foreign royal visitor to America. This young man gained massive media coverage but little additional glory from his American visit, merely because he was poorly advised. To the American public, he became a well-dressed, charming, sport-loving, dancing, perhaps frivolous youth. Nothing was done to add dignity and prestige to this impression until near the end of his stay when he made a trip in the New York subway. This sole venture into democracy and the serious business of living as evidenced in workers' daily habits aroused new interest. Had he been properly advised, he would have augmented this by serious studies of American life. As a result of lacking well-directed propaganda, he became an Americanized, not what he constitutionally represents, a symbol of national unity, but part and parcel of sporting high society and ballroom dancing beauties. His nation lost an invaluable opportunity to increase goodwill and understanding between the two countries when it failed to understand the importance of correct public relations advice. The public actions of America's chief executive are, if you choose to put it that way, stage-managed, but they're chosen to represent and dramatize the person and their function as representative of the people. A political practice rooted in the tendency of popular leaders to follow more often than they lead is the technique of the trial balloon they use to maintain, as they believe, contact with the public. Politicians, of course, keep their ear to the ground. It might be called the clinical ear. It touches the ground and hears disturbances in the political universe. But they often don't know what the disturbances mean, whether they're superficial or fundamental. So they send up their balloon. They may send out an anonymous interview through the press. They then wait for reverberations to come from the public, a public that expresses itself in mass meetings, resolutions, telegrams, or even obvious manifestations like editorials in partisan or non-partisan press. Based on these reactions, they then publicly adopt their original tentative policy, reject it, or modify it to conform to the sum of public opinion that has reached them. This method is modeled on peace feelers used during wartime to test enemy disposition to make peace or test any other popular tendency. It's the method commonly used by politicians before committing to legislation of any kind and by governments before committing to foreign or domestic policies. It's a method with little justification. If politicians are real leaders, they will be able, through skillful use of propaganda, to lead the people instead of following them through the clumsy instrument of trial and error. The propagandist's approach is exactly opposite to that of the politician just described. The entire basis of successful propaganda is having an objective and then endeavoring to reach it through exact knowledge of the public and skillfully manipulating circumstances to influence that public. As one philosopher put it, the function of a statesman is to express the will of the people in the manner of a scientist. The political leader of today should be as finely versed in propaganda technique as in political economy and civics. If they remain merely a reflection of their community's average intelligence, they might as well leave politics. If we're dealing with a democracy where the group follows those they recognize as leaders, why shouldn't young people training for leadership be trained in its technique as well as its idealism? As one historian said, when the interval between the intellectual classes and the practical classes is too great, the former will possess no influence, the latter will reap no benefits. Propaganda bridges this interval in our modern complex civilization. Only through wise use of propaganda will our government, considered as the continuous administrative organ of the people, be able to maintain the intimate relationship with the public necessary in a democracy. As one commentator recently pointed out, there's a need for an intelligent interpretative bureau for our government. There is, it's true, a division handling current information in the State Department, which at first was headed by a trained newspaper person. But later, this position began to be filled by people from the diplomatic service, people with very little knowledge of the public. While some of these diplomats have done well, in the long run the country would benefit if this office's functions were in the hands of a different type of person. There should, I believe, be an official familiar with the problem of dispensing information to the press, someone the head of state can consult with and who has sufficient authority to persuade them to make public information that, for insufficient reason, is suppressed. The propagandist's function is much broader in scope than merely dispensing information to the press. The government should create a high-level position for public relations. This official's function should be to correctly interpret the nation's aims and ideals throughout the world and to keep citizens in touch with governmental activities and the reasons behind them. They would, in short, interpret the people to the government and the government to the people. Such an official would be neither a propagandist nor a press agent in the ordinary understanding of those terms. They would rather be a trained technician helpful in analyzing public thought and trends to keep the government informed about the public and the people informed about government. The nation's international relations would be greatly improved under such circumstances. Ours must be a leadership democracy administered by the intelligent minority who know how to organize and guide the masses. Is this government by propaganda? Call it, if you prefer, government by education. But education in the academic sense isn't sufficient. It must be enlightened expert propaganda through the creation of circumstances, through highlighting significant events and dramatizing important issues. The statesmen of the future will thus be enabled to focus the public mind on crucial policy points and organize a vast, diverse mass of voters to clear understanding and intelligent action. Chapter 6: Women's Activities and Propaganda. Women in contemporary America have achieved legal equality with men. This doesn't mean their activities are identical to men's. Women collectively still have special interests and activities in addition to their economic pursuits and vocational interests. Women's most obvious influence is exerted when they're organized and armed with propaganda tools. So organized and armed, they've made their influence felt on city councils, state legislatures, and national congresses, on executives, on political campaigns, and on public opinion generally, both local and national. In politics, American women today occupy a much more important position from the standpoint of their influence in organized groups than from the standpoint of leadership they've acquired in actual political positions or office holding. The professional woman politician has had, up to the present, not much influence, nor do women generally regard her as the most important element in question. After all, some female governors were simply women in the home, stand-ins for deposed husbands. Others, while capable, are from all accounts hardly leaders of statesmanship or public opinion. If the suffrage campaign did nothing more, it showed the possibilities of propaganda to achieve certain ends. This propaganda today is being used by women to achieve their programs nationally and in the states. They're organized as legislative committees of women's organizations, including the League of Women Voters, Young Women's Christian Association, Women's Christian Temperance Union, Federation of Women's Clubs, and others. These organizations map out a legislative program and then use modern propaganda techniques to make this legislative program actually pass into law. Their accomplishments in the field are various. They can justifiably take credit for much welfare legislation. The 8-hour day for women is theirs. Undoubtedly, prohibition and its enforcement are theirs, if they can be considered an accomplishment. So is legislation stipulating federal government support of maternity welfare in state governments. This wouldn't have passed without the political foresight and skill of certain prominent women leaders. Federal measures endorsed at the first convention of a major women's voting organization typify social welfare activities of women's organizations. These covered broad interests like child welfare, education, the home and high prices, women and paid occupations, public health and morals, independent citizenship for married women, and others. To promote these principles, the organization has published all types of literature, such as bulletins, calendars, election information, has held correspondence courses on government, and conducted demonstration classes and citizenship schools. Possibly, the effectiveness of women's organizations in American politics today is due to two things. First, the training of a professional class of executive or legislative secretaries during suffrage campaigns, where every device known to propagandists had to be used to organize a resistant majority. Second, the transition into peacetime activities of many prominent women who were in suffrage campaigns and who also devoted themselves to important drives and mass influence movements during the war. Women like prominent socialites and activists come to mind. If I've seemed to concentrate on women's accomplishments in politics, it's because they afford a particularly striking example of intelligent use of new propaganda to secure attention and acceptance of minority ideas. It's perhaps curiously appropriate that the latest recruits to the political arena should recognize and use the newest weapons of persuasion to offset any lack of experience with what's somewhat euphemistically termed practical politics. As an example of this new technique, some years ago, a women's consumer committee fighting a particular tariff rented an empty store and set up an exhibit of merchandise, tagging each item with the current price and the price it would cost if the tariff went through. Hundreds of visitors to this shop rallied to the committee's cause. But there are also non-political fields where women can make and have made their influence felt for social ends, and where they've used the principle of group leadership in attaining desired objectives. In major women's club federations, there are thousands of clubs. Broadly classified, they include civic and city clubs, mothers and homemakers clubs, cultural clubs devoted to art, music, or literature, business and professional women's clubs, and general women's clubs that may embrace civic or community phases or combine some of the other activities listed. The Women's Club is generally effective on behalf of health education, in furthering appreciation of fine arts, in sponsoring legislation that affects the welfare of women and children, in playground development and park improvement, in raising standards of social or political ethics, in homemaking and home economics, education, and the like. In these fields, the Woman's Club concerns itself with efforts not ordinarily covered by existing agencies, and often both initiates and helps further movements for community good. A club interested principally in homemaking and practical arts can sponsor a cooking school for young brides and others. An example of keen interest of women in this field of education is the cooking school recently conducted by a major newspaper, which held its classes in a large hall seating almost 3,000 people. For several days, the hall was filled to capacity, rivaling the drawing power of famous performers and dramatically refuting the idea that women in large cities aren't interested in housewifery. A movement for serving milk in public schools or establishing a baby health station at the Department of Health will be an effort close to the heart of a club devoted to mothers and child welfare interests. A music club can broaden its sphere and serve the community by cooperating with local radio stations and arranging better musical programs. Fighting poor music can be as militant a campaign and marshal as varied resources as any political battle. An art club can be active in securing loan exhibitions for its city. It can also arrange traveling exhibits of its members' artwork or show artwork from schools or universities. A literary club may step out of its comfortable circle of lectures and literary celebrities to take a definite part in community educational life. It can sponsor, for instance, a competition in public schools for the best essay on city history or on the life of its most famous citizen. Over and above the particular object for which the Woman's Club may have been created, it commonly stands ready to initiate or help any movement that has for its object a distinct public good in the community. More important, it constitutes an organized channel through which women can make themselves felt as a definite part of public opinion. Just as women supplement men in private life, they will supplement men in public life by concentrating their organized efforts on objects that men are likely to ignore. There's a tremendous field for women as active champions of new ideas and new methods of political and social improvement. When organized and conscious of their power to influence their surroundings, women can use their newly acquired freedom in many ways to shape the world into a better place to live. Chapter 7. Propaganda for Education. Education isn't securing its proper share of public interest. The public school system is being adequately supported materially and financially. There's marked eagerness for college education and vague aspiration for culture expressed in countless courses and lectures. But the public isn't aware of education's real value and doesn't realize that education as a social force isn't receiving the attention it deserves in a democracy. It's felt, for example, that education is entitled to more newspaper space. Well-informed discussion of education hardly exists unless a controversial school system is created or outside of occasional discussions such as those aroused by a university's decision to establish a business school. Education doesn't attract active public interest. There are several reasons for this condition. First, educators have been trained to stimulate individual students' thinking in their classrooms, but haven't been trained as educators of the general public. In a democracy, educators should, in addition to academic duties, bear a definite and beneficial relationship to the general public. This public doesn't come within the immediate scope of their academic duties, but in a sense, they depend on it for their living, for moral support, and the general cultural tone on which their work must be based. In the field of education, we find what we found in politics and other fields. The evolution of the professional practitioner hasn't kept pace with the social evolution around them and is out of alignment with the instruments for disseminating ideas that modern society has developed. If this is true, then educator training in this respect should begin in teacher training schools, with the addition to their curricula of whatever is necessary to broaden their viewpoint. The public can't understand unless teachers understand the relationship between the general public and academic ideas. Teacher training schools should provide for training educators to make them realize theirs is a twofold job: education as a teacher and education as a communicator. A second reason for the present remoteness of education from public thoughts and interests lies in the mental attitude of educators, whether elementary school teachers or college professors, toward the world outside school. This is a difficult psychological problem. Teachers find themselves in a world where emphasis is put on objective goals and objective achievements prized by American society. They themselves are moderately or poorly paid. Judging themselves by commonly accepted standards, they can't help but feel inferior because they find themselves continually compared in their own pupils' minds with successful business people and successful leaders in the outside world. Thus, educators become repressed and suppressed in our civilization. As things stand, this condition can't be changed from outside unless the general public alters its achievement standards, which it isn't likely to do soon. Yet it can be changed by the teaching profession itself if it becomes conscious not only of its individualistic relationship to students, but also of its social relationship to the general public. The teaching profession, as such, has the right to carry on definite propaganda to enlighten the public and assert its intimate relationship to the society it serves. In addition to conducting propaganda on behalf of individual members, education must also raise general appreciation of the teaching profession. Unless the profession can lift itself by its own efforts, it will rapidly lose the power to recruit outstanding talent. Propaganda can't change everything currently unsatisfactory in the educational situation. There are factors such as low pay and lack of adequate provision for retired teachers that definitely affect the profession's status. It's possible, through an intelligent appeal based on the actual present composition of the public mind, to modify the general attitude toward the teaching profession. Such a changed attitude will begin by expressing itself in insistence on more adequate salaries for the profession. There are various ways academic organizations in America handle their financial problems. One type of college or university depends for monetary support on grants from state legislatures. Another depends on private endowment. There are other types of educational institutions, such as sectarian ones, but the two chief types include by far the greater number of our institutions of higher learning. State universities are supported by grants from state residents, voted by state legislatures. In theory, the degree of support the university receives depends on the degree of acceptance accorded by voters. State universities prosper according to the extent they can sell themselves to state residents. State universities are therefore in an unfortunate position unless their president happens to be exceptional as a communicator and dramatizer of educational issues. Yet if this is the case, if the university shapes its whole policy toward gaining state legislature support, its educational function may suffer. It may be tempted to base its whole appeal to the public on its public service, real or supposed, and permit education of individual students to take care of itself. It may attempt to educate state residents at its own pupils' expense. This may generate numerous problems to the extent of making the university a political instrument, a mere tool of the political group in power. If the president dominates both public and professional politicians, this may lead to a situation where the president's personality outweighs the institution's true function. Endowed colleges or universities have equally perplexing problems. Endowed colleges depend on support, usually, from key people in industry whose social and economic objectives are concrete and limited, therefore often at odds with the pursuit of abstract knowledge. Successful business people criticize great universities for being too academic, but seldom for being too practical. One might imagine that key people who support universities would like them to specialize in schools of applied science, practical salesmanship, or industrial efficiency. And it may well be, in many instances, that the demands potential donors make on these institutions directly contradict the interests of scholarship and general culture. We have, therefore, the unusual situation of colleges trying to carry on propaganda in favor of scholarship among people quite out of sympathy with the aims they're asked to fund. People who, by commonly accepted standards, are failures or very moderate successes in American society, the educators, seek to convince outstanding successes, the business people, that they should give their money to ideals they don't pursue. People who, through a sense of inferiority, despise money, seek to win the goodwill of people who value money. It seems possible that the future status of the endowed college will depend on balancing these forces, with both academic and funding elements obtaining due consideration. Colleges must win public support. If potential donors are apathetic, enthusiastic public approval must be obtained to convince them. If they seek unduly to influence educational policy, public opinion must support the college in continuing its proper functions. If either factor dominates unduly, we're likely to find demagoguery or elitism aimed at pleasing one group or the other. There's still another potential solution. It's possible that through educational propaganda aimed at developing greater social consciousness among the country's people, there may be awakened in the minds of business leaders, as a class, social consciousness that will produce more minds of philanthropic leaders. Some universities discover that endowments are rare. Why? Because people think the university is a state institution and therefore publicly supported. Many leading universities rightly feel that results of their scholarly research should not only be presented to libraries and learned publications, but should also, where practical and useful, be given to the public in dramatic form the public can understand. Leading institutions are examples. Not long ago, a certain professor made headlines. For several days, you could hardly pick up a paper in any larger city without finding his name linked with his achievement. The professor, back from a trip in the interests of science, had solved a mystery of an ancient calendar. He'd discovered the key to how an ancient civilization kept track of time. Checking their record of celestial events against known astronomical facts, he'd found perfect correlation between their time count and true positions of a planet in the 6th century before Christ. A civilization that flourished in the Western Hemisphere 25 centuries ago was demonstrated to have attained heights previously unappreciated by the modern world. How the professor's discovery happened to be chronicled in popular press is also, in retrospect, a matter of interest. If left to his own devices, he might never have appeared in print except perhaps in some technical publication, and his remarks there would have been no more intelligible to the average person than if they'd been inscribed in ancient hieroglyphics. Popularization of this message from antiquity was due to the initiative of someone skilled in public communication. It may surprise and shock some people to be told that the oldest and most dignified seats of learning in America now hire press representatives, just as railroad companies, fraternal organizations, movie producers, and political parties retain them. It's nevertheless a fact. There's hardly a college or university in the country that doesn't, with governing body and faculty approval, maintain a publicity office with a director and assistants for establishing friendly relations with newspapers and through newspapers with the public. This breaks sharply with tradition. In older seats of learning, it's a recent innovation. It violates the fundamental article in old academic society's creed. Cloistered seclusion used to be considered the first essential of scholarship. Colleges were anxious to preserve their distance from the world. Colleges used to resent outside interest in their affairs. They might, somewhat reluctantly and contemptuously, admit reporters to commencement exercises, but no further would they go. Today, if a newspaper reporter wants to interview a professor at a leading university, they merely telephone the information office. Officially, some universities still shy away from the title, Director of Publicity. Informally, however, the person with the long title is the publicity representative. They're an important official today. It may be a new idea that a university president will concern themselves with what kind of mental picture their institution produces in the public mind. Yet it's part of the president's work to see that their university takes its proper place in the community and therefore also in the community mind, producing desired results both culturally and financially. If their institution doesn't produce the mental picture it should, one of two things may be wrong. Either the media of communication with the public may be wrong or unbalanced, or their institution may be at fault. The public is getting an oblique impression of the university, in which case the impression should be modified. Or it may be that the public is getting a correct impression, in which case very possibly the university's work itself should be modified. Both possibilities lie within the province of public relations advisors. One university recently instituted a cultural center that was solemnly inaugurated in the presence of government representatives to emphasize its high standing in certain studies. Years ago, another founded a museum ceremoniously opened by foreign royalty. Many colleges maintain extension courses that bring their work to broad public knowledge. It's of course proper that such courses be made known to the general public, but if they've been badly planned from a public relations viewpoint, if they're unduly scholastic and detached, their effect may be opposite to favorable. In such a case, it isn't the work of public relations advisors to urge that courses be made better known, but to urge they first be modified to conform to the impression the college wishes to create, where that's compatible with the university's scholastic ideals. Again, it may be the general opinion that a certain institution's work is 80% postgraduate research, an opinion that may tend to alienate public interest. This opinion may be true or false. If false, it should be corrected by highlighting undergraduate activities. If, on the other hand, it's true that 80% of work is postgraduate research, the most should be made of that fact. It should be the president's concern to make known discoveries of possible public interest. A university expedition into biblical lands may be uninteresting as a purely scholastic undertaking, but if it contributes light on some biblical assertion, it will immediately arouse interest in large population masses. The biology department may be hunting for some strange microorganism with no known relation to any human disease, but the fact that it's chasing microorganisms is in itself capable of dramatic presentation to the public. Many universities now gladly lend faculty members to assist in investigations of public interest. Thus, one lent a professor to aid the government in preparing the national census. A professor from another has been called to advise on currency matters. In the ethical sense, propaganda bears the same relation to education as to business or politics. It may be abused. It may be used to over-advertise an institution and create artificial values in the public mind. There can be no absolute guarantee against its misuse. Chapter 8. Propaganda. In social service, public relations advisors are necessary to social work. Since social service, by its very nature, can continue only through voluntary support of the wealthy, it's obliged to use propaganda continually. Leaders in social service were among the first to consciously use propaganda in its modern sense. The great enemy of any attempt to change people's habits is inertia. Civilization is limited by inertia. Our attitude toward social relations, toward economics, toward national and international politics continues past attitudes and strengthens them under the force of tradition. Reformers drop their mantles of reform on willing shoulders of successors, and so on endlessly. Opposing this traditional acceptance of existing ideas is active public opinion that has been consciously directed into movements against inertia. Public opinion was formerly made or changed by tribal chiefs, by kings, by religious leaders. Today, the privilege of attempting to sway public opinion belongs to everyone. It's one manifestation of democracy that anyone may try to convince others and assume leadership on behalf of their own cause. New ideas, new precedents are continually striving for a place in the scheme of things. Social settlements, organized campaigns against disease, various research activities aiming directly at eliminating social problems, a multitude of altruistic activities that could be cataloged only in a book of many pages, all need knowledge of the public mind and mass psychology to achieve their aims. Literature on social service publicity is so extensive and underlying principles so fundamental that only one example is necessary here to illustrate the technique of social service propaganda. A social service organization undertook to fight violence, discrimination, and civil rights violations against African Americans in the South. An organization dedicated to advancement of civil rights had the fight in hand. As a matter of technique, they decided to dramatize the year's campaign in an annual convention that would concentrate attention on the problem. Should it be held in the North, South, West, or East? Since the purpose was to affect the entire country, the association was advised to hold it in the South. "For," said the propagandist, "a point of view on a Southern question emanating from a Southern center would have greater authority than the same point of view issuing from any other locality, particularly when that point of view was at odds with traditional Southern views." Atlanta was chosen. The third step was to surround the conference with people who were symbols for ideas that carried weight all over the country. Support of leaders from diverse groups was sought. Messages were sent to leaders of religious, political, social, and educational groups asking for their point of view on the conference purpose. But in addition to these group leaders of national standing, it was particularly important from a technical standpoint to secure opinions of group leaders from the South, even from Atlanta itself, to emphasize conference purposes to the entire public. There was one group in Atlanta that could be approached. A group of ministers had been bold enough to come out for greater racial harmony. This group was approached and agreed to cooperate in the conference. The event ran off as scheduled. The program itself followed the general scheme. African Americans and white people from the South, on the same platform, expressed the same point of view. A dramatic element was spotlighted here and there. A national leader from the Northeast agreed in principle and practice with a religious leader from the South. If radio had been in effect, the whole country might have heard and been moved by the speeches and principles expressed. But the public read the words and ideas in the country's press. For the event had been created of such important component parts as to awaken interest throughout the country and gain support for its ideas even in the South. Editorials in the Southern press reflecting public opinion of their communities showed that the subject had become one of interest to editors because of participation by Southern leaders. The event naturally gave the organization itself substantial weapons with which to appeal to an increasingly wider circle. Further publicity was attained by mailing reports, letters, and other propaganda to selected groups of the public. As for practical results, the immediate one was a change in the minds of many Southern editors who realized the question at issue wasn't only an emotional one, but also a discussable one. And this point of view was immediately reflected to their readers. Further results are hard to measure precisely. The conference had its definite effect in building up the racial consciousness and solidarity of African Americans. The decline in violence is very probably a result of this and other efforts of the organization. Many churches have made paid advertising and organized propaganda part of their regular activities. They've developed church advertising committees that use newspapers and billboards as well as pamphlets. Many denominations maintain their own periodicals. Some church boards systematically give announcements and releases to press and magazines. But in a broader sense, the very activities of social service are propaganda activities. A campaign for tooth preservation seeks to alter people's habits toward more frequent brushing. A campaign for better parks seeks to alter people's opinion about taxing themselves for park facilities. A campaign against disease is an attempt to convince everyone that disease can be cured, that persons with certain symptoms should immediately see a doctor, and the like. A campaign to lower infant mortality is an effort to alter mothers' habits regarding feeding, bathing, and caring for babies. Social service, in fact, is identical with propaganda in many cases. Even those aspects of social service that are governmental and administrative, rather than charitable and spontaneous, depend on wise propaganda for effectiveness. One professor, in his book on prison reform, states that improvements in prison administration are hampered by political influences. The legislature must be persuaded to permit utilization of best methods of scientific prison reform, and for this there's necessary development of enlightened public opinion. Until such a situation has been brought about, he states, prison reform is doomed to be sporadic, local, and generally ineffective. The solution of prison problems, then, seems to be fundamentally a problem of conscientious and scientific publicity. Social progress is simply the progressive education and enlightenment of the public mind regarding its immediate and distant social problems. Chapter 9: Art and Science. In educating the American public toward greater art appreciation, propaganda plays an important part. When art galleries seek to launch an artist's canvases, they should create public acceptance for their works. To increase public appreciation, a deliberate promotional effort must be made. In art, as in politics, the minority rules, but it can rule only by going out to meet the public on its own ground, by understanding the anatomy of public opinion and using it. In applied and commercial art, propaganda makes greater opportunities for artists than ever before. This arises because mass production reaches an impasse when it competes on price basis only. It must, therefore, in many fields create competition based on aesthetic values. Business of many types capitalizes the aesthetic sense to increase markets and profits, which is only another way of saying that artists have the opportunity of collaborating with industry in such a way as to improve public taste, injecting beautiful instead of ugly motifs into articles of common use, and furthermore, securing recognition and money for themselves. Propaganda can play a part in pointing out what's beautiful and what isn't, and business can definitely help in this way to raise the level of American culture. In this process, propaganda will naturally use the authority of group leaders whose taste and opinion are recognized. The public must be interested through associational values and dramatic incidents. New inspiration, which to artists may be very technical and abstract beauty, must be made vital to the public by association with values it recognizes and responds to. For instance, in manufacturing American silk, markets are developed by going to Paris for inspiration. Paris can give American silk a stamp of authority that will help it achieve definite position in the United States. A news clipping tells the story from an actual incident of this sort. For the first time in history, American art materials were to be exhibited in the decorative arts section of a major French museum. The exposition, opening with government patronage, included silks from an American manufacturer, designs based on the inspiration of a famous French iron worker, the modern master who makes wonderful art works from iron. This artist designed and made the monumental iron doors of a war memorial. He was asked to assist and participate in this exposition, which would show France the accomplishments of American industrial art. 30 designs inspired by his work were embodied in thousands of yards of printed silks, metallics, and cut velvets in 100 colors. These textiles were the first to show the influence of the modern master. The silken fabrics possessed striking composition, showing characteristic motifs that were embodied in the tracery of large designs by American artists who succeeded in translating iron into silk, a task that might appear almost impossible. The strength and brilliance of the original design was enhanced by the beauty and warmth of color. The result of this ceremony was that prominent department stores in major cities asked to have this exhibition. They tried to shape public taste in conformity with the idea that had Paris approval. The commercial silks gained a place in public esteem by being associated with the work of a recognized artist and with a great art museum. The same can be said of almost any commercial product susceptible to beautiful design. There are few products in daily use, whether furniture, clothes, lamps, posters, commercial labels, book jackets, handbags, or bathtubs that aren't subject to the laws of good taste. In America, whole departments of production are being changed through propaganda to fill an economic as well as aesthetic need. Manufacturing is being modified to conform to economic need to satisfy public demand for more beauty. A piano manufacturer recently engaged artists to design modernist pianos. This wasn't done because there existed widespread demand for modernist pianos. Indeed, the manufacturer probably expected to sell few. But to draw attention to pianos, you must have something more than a piano. People at social gatherings won't talk about pianos, but they may talk about the new modernist piano. 3 years ago, when a government official was asked to appoint a commission to an international decorative arts exposition, he did so. As an associate commissioner, I assisted in organizing the group of important business leaders in the industrial art field who went as delegates to visit and report on the exposition. The propaganda carried on for the commission's aims and purposes undoubtedly had widespread effect on Americans' attitude toward art and industry. It was only a few years later that the modern art movement penetrated all fields of industry. Department stores took it up. Major stores held art expositions in which museums collaborated as advisors. Other stores sponsored modern art expositions with foreign exhibitors. These stores, coming closely in touch with people's lives, performed a promotional function in bringing to the people the best in art as it related to these industries. Museums at the same time were alive to the importance of making contact with the public mind by using department stores to increase art appreciation. Of all art institutions, the museum suffers most from lack of effective propaganda. Most present-day museums have the reputation of being mausoleums or sanctuaries, whereas they should be leaders and teachers in the aesthetic life of the community. They have little vital relation to life. The treasures of beauty in a museum need to be interpreted to the public, and this requires a communicator. A housewife in a modest apartment doubtless feels little interest in an ancient Greek vase in a major museum. Yet an artist working with a pottery firm may adapt the vase's design to a set of china, and this china, priced low through quantity production, may find its way to that modest apartment, developing unconsciously through its fine line and color an appreciation of beauty. Some American museums feel this responsibility. One major museum rightly prides itself on its attendance numbers, on its efforts to dramatize and make visual the civilizations its various departments reveal, on its special lectures, its story hours, its loaned collections of prints and photographs and slides, its facilities offered to commercial firms in the field of applied art, on outside lecturers invited to lecture in its auditorium, and on lectures given by its staff to outside organizations, and on free concerts given in the museum, which tend to dramatize the museum as a home of beauty. Yet that isn't the whole of the problem. It isn't merely a question of making people come to the museum. It's also a question of making the museum and the beauty it houses go to the people. The museum's accomplishments shouldn't be evaluated merely in terms of visitor numbers. Its function isn't merely to receive visitors, but to project itself and what it stands for in the community it serves. The museum can stand in its community for a definite aesthetic standard that can, with the help of intelligent propaganda, permeate the daily lives of all its neighbors. Why shouldn't a museum establish an art council to establish standards in home decoration, in architecture, and in commercial production, or a research board for applied arts? Why shouldn't the museum, instead of merely preserving the art treasures it possesses, make their meaning clearer in terms the general public understands? A recent annual report of an art museum in one of the large United States cities says, "An underlying characteristic of an art museum like ours must be its attitude of conservatism, for after all, its first duty is to treasure the great achievements of people in the arts and sciences." Is that true? Isn't another important duty to interpret the models of beauty it possesses? If the museum's duty is to be active, it must study how best to make its message intelligible to the community it serves. It must boldly assume aesthetic leadership. As in art, so in science, both pure and applied. Pure science was once guarded and fostered by learned societies and scientific associations. Now, pure science finds support and encouragement also in industry. Many of the laboratories where abstract research is pursued are now connected with some large corporation quite willing to devote hundreds of thousands of dollars to scientific study for the sake of one breakthrough invention or discovery that may emerge from it. Big business, of course, gains heavily when the invention emerges. But at that very moment, it assumes the responsibility of placing the new invention at the service of the public. It assumes also the responsibility of interpreting its meaning to the public. Industrial interests can furnish to schools, colleges, and postgraduate university courses the exact truth concerning scientific progress of our age. They not only can do so, they're under obligation to do so. Propaganda as an instrument of commercial competition has opened opportunities to inventors and given great stimulus to research scientists. In the last 5 or 10 years, the successes of some larger corporations have been so outstanding that the whole field of science has received tremendous impetus. Major technology companies have realized the importance of scientific research. They've also understood that their ideas must be made intelligible to the public to be fully successful. New technologies are used as promotional aids. Propaganda assists in marketing new inventions. Propaganda, by repeatedly interpreting new scientific ideas and inventions to the public, has made the public more receptive. Propaganda is accustoming the public to change and progress. Chapter 10. The Mechanics of Propaganda. The media by which advocates transmit their messages to the public through propaganda include all the means by which people today communicate their ideas to one another. There's no means of human communication that may not also be a means of deliberate propaganda, because propaganda is simply establishing mutual understanding between an individual and a group. The important point for propagandists is that the relative value of various propaganda instruments and their relation to the masses are constantly changing. To get full reach for their message, they must take advantage of these shifts in value the instant they occur. 50 years ago, the public meeting was a propaganda instrument par excellence. Today, it's difficult to get more than a handful of people to attend a public meeting unless extraordinary attractions are part of the program. The automobile takes them away from home, the radio keeps them home, successive daily newspaper editions bring information to them in office or subway, and also they're tired of rally fanfare. Instead, there are numerous other communication media, some new, others old, but so transformed they've become virtually new. The newspaper, of course, remains always a primary medium for transmitting opinions and ideas, in other words, for propaganda. It wasn't many years ago that newspaper editors resented what they called the use of news columns for propaganda purposes. Some editors would even kill a good story if they imagined its publication might benefit anyone. This point of view is now largely abandoned. Today, leading editorial offices take the view that the real criterion governing publication or non-publication of matter that comes to the desk is its news value. Newspapers can't assume, nor is it their function to assume, responsibility for guaranteeing that what they publish won't work out to somebody's interest. There's hardly a single item in any daily paper whose publication doesn't or might not profit or injure somebody. That's the nature of news. What newspapers do strive for is that the news they publish will be accurate and, since they must select from the mass of available news material, that it will be of interest and importance to large groups of readers. In its editorial columns, the newspaper is a personality commenting on things and events from its individual point of view. But in its news columns, the typical modern American newspaper attempts to reproduce, with due regard to news interest, the outstanding events and opinions of the day. It doesn't ask whether a given item is propaganda or not. What's important is that it be news. And in the selection of news, the editor is usually entirely independent. In leading newspapers, to take outstanding examples, news is printed because of its news value and for no other reason. Editors determine with complete independence what is and isn't news. They brook no censorship. They aren't influenced by any external pressure nor swayed by any values of expediency or opportunism. The conscientious editor on every newspaper realizes that their obligation to the public is news. The fact of its accomplishment makes it news. If public relations advisors can breathe life into an idea and make it take its place among other ideas and events, it will receive the public attention it merits. There can be no question of their contaminating news at its source. They create some of the day's events, which must compete in the editorial office with other events. Often the events they create may be specially acceptable to a newspaper's public, and they may create them with that public in mind. If important things of life today consist of transcontinental communications arranged by commercial companies, if they consist of inventions that will be commercially advantageous to those who market them, if they consist of epoch-making innovations, then all this is news. The so-called flow of propaganda into newspaper offices may, simply at the editor's discretion, find its way to the wastebasket. The source of news offered to editors should always be clearly stated and facts accurately presented. The situation of magazines at the present moment, from the propagandist's viewpoint, is different from that of daily newspapers. The average magazine assumes no obligation, as newspapers do, to reflect current news. It selects its material deliberately in accordance with a continuous policy. It isn't, like the newspaper, an organ of public opinion, but tends rather to become a promotional organ, promoting a particular idea, whether it be good housekeeping, smart apparel, beauty and home decoration, skepticism about popular opinion, general enlightenment, liberalism, or amusement. One magazine may aim to sell health, another English gardens, another fashionable men's wear, another philosophical ideas. In all departments in which various magazines specialize, public relations advisors may play an important part. They may, because of their clients' interest, assist magazines to create events that further their promotion. A bank, to emphasize the importance of its women's department, may arrange to supply a leading women's magazine with a series of articles and advice on investments written by the woman expert in charge of this department. The women's magazine, in turn, will use this new feature as a means of building additional prestige and circulation. The lecture, once a powerful means of influencing public opinion, has changed its value. The lecture itself may be only a symbol, a ceremony. Its importance for propaganda purposes lies in the fact that it was delivered. A professor expounding an epoch-making invention may speak to 500 people or only 50. Their lecture, if important, will be broadcast. Reports will appear in newspapers. Discussion will be stimulated. The real value of the lecture, from the propaganda viewpoint, is in its repercussion to the general public. Radio is at present one of the most important tools of propagandists. Its future development is uncertain. It may compete with newspapers as an advertising medium. Its ability to reach millions of people simultaneously naturally appeals to advertisers. And since the average advertiser has a limited advertising budget, money spent on radio will tend to be withdrawn from newspapers. To what extent are publishers alive to this new phenomenon? It's bound to come close to American journalism and publishing. Newspapers have recognized the advertising potential of companies that manufacture radio equipment and of radio stores, large and small. Newspapers have accorded radio in their news and feature columns an importance relative to increasing public attention given to radio. At the same time, certain newspapers have bought radio stations and linked them with their news and entertainment distribution facilities, supplying these two features over the air to the public. It's possible that newspaper chains will sell schedules of advertising space on the air and on paper. Newspaper chains will possibly contract with advertisers for circulation on paper and over the air. At present, there are publishers who sell space in the air and in their columns, but they regard the two as separate ventures. Large groups, political, racial, sectarian, economic, or professional, are tending to control stations to promote their points of view. Or is it conceivable that America may adopt a system under which the listener, instead of the advertiser, pays? Whether the present system is changed, advertisers and propagandists must necessarily adapt themselves to it. Whether in the future airspace will be sold openly as such, or whether the message will reach the public in the form of straight entertainment and news, or as special programs for particular groups, propagandists must be prepared to meet the conditions and use them. The American motion picture is the greatest unconscious carrier of propaganda in the world today. It's a great distributor for ideas and opinions. The motion picture can standardize the ideas and habits of a nation. Because pictures are made to meet market demands, they reflect, emphasize, and even exaggerate broad popular tendencies rather than stimulate new ideas and opinions. The motion picture uses only ideas and facts that are in vogue. As newspapers seek to purvey news, it seeks to purvey entertainment. Another instrument of propaganda is personality. Has the device of the exploited personality been pushed too far? A president photographed on vacation in full ceremonial regalia in company with indigenous leaders was the climax of a greatly over-reported vacation. Obviously, a public personality can be made absurd by misuse of the very mechanism that helped create it. Yet the vivid dramatization of personality will always remain one of the functions of public relations advisors. The public instinctively demands a personality to represent a conspicuous corporation or enterprise. There's a story that a great financier discharged a partner because he had divorced his wife. "But what," asked the partner, "have my private affairs to do with banking business?" "If you aren't capable of managing your own wife," was the reply, "people will certainly believe you aren't capable of managing their money." Propagandists must treat personality as they would treat any other objective fact within their province. A personality may create circumstances, as aviators created goodwill between nations. Events may create a personality, as war created political figures. It's often difficult to say which creates the other. Once a public figure has decided what ends they wish to achieve, they must regard themselves objectively and present an outward picture consistent with their real character and aims. There are a multitude of other avenues of approach to the public mind, some old, some new. No attempt will be made to discuss each one separately. Schools may disseminate information concerning scientific facts. The fact that a commercial concern may eventually profit from widespread understanding of its activities because of this doesn't condemn the dissemination of such information, provided the subject merits study on the part of students. If a baking corporation contributes pictures and charts to a school to show how bread is made, these promotional activities, if they're accurate and candid, are in no way objectionable, provided school authorities accept or reject such offers carefully on their educational merits. It may be that a new product will be announced to the public through a motion picture of a parade taking place 1,000 miles away. Or the manufacturer of a new small airplane may personally appear and speak in 1,000,000 homes through radio and television. The person who would most effectively transmit their message to the public must be alert to use all means of propaganda. Undoubtedly, the public is becoming aware of the methods being used to shape its opinions and habits. If the public is better informed about the processes of its own life, it will be so much more receptive to reasonable appeals to its own interests. No matter how sophisticated, how cynical the public may become about publicity methods, It must respond to basic appeals because it will always need food, crave amusement, long for beauty, and respond to leadership. If the public becomes more intelligent in its commercial demands, commercial firms will meet the new standards. If it becomes weary of old methods used to persuade it to accept a given idea or commodity, its leaders will present their appeals more intelligently. Propaganda will never die out. Intelligent people must realize that propaganda is the modern instrument by which they can fight for productive ends and help to bring order out of chaos.